We're excited to announce that our very own podcasting platform, Zencastr, has become a new sponsor to the show. Check out the podcast's discount link in our show notes and stay tuned for why we love using Zen for the podcast.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management, archaeology, and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 221 for August 25th, 2021. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we bring on a guest to talk about recovering World War I and II soldiers in Latvia through the organization Legenda Military Archaeology. The CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now. Welcome to the show, everyone. Joining me today is Bill in California.
Good morning.
And also Heather in California. I'm going to have to get more specific.
Good morning, everyone.
All right. So, man, the CRM Archaeology Podcast is kind of on a roll. And thanks to Heather, because we've had a few great interviews in the last month or so. We've got another one coming up. And then stay tuned. We have another interview on our next episode coming up with a CRM archaeologist, basically somebody who's had an interesting career trajectory and done some stuff that's led her to CRM. So stay tuned for that. But this week, we are going to focus on something completely different. And Heather brought this guest to us and this idea. So I'm going to let her introduce the guest. Heather, it's all you.
Sure. Well, Victoria, thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Hi.
I'm going to introduce what group Victoria is with. Victoria's been part of this group for a very long time, and you'll understand why basically all her life as we get into the podcast. But the group that she is involved with is called Legenda Military Archaeology. It's a nonprofit organization that covers and identifies missing soldiers from the First and Second World Wars in Latvia. It's a fascinating group. It's a group that, these are all volunteers that donate all of their, quite a bit of their free time to not only recover these soldiers and give them the honor that they should have and reunite in some ways the families with the soldiers that, have been lost for many, many years, in some cases, 100 years. So, this is a group that started 20 years ago. And I'm going to let Victoria kind of explain as we go throughout the podcast how that came to be. During the wars, the First and Second World Wars, a lot of times the bodies of those that had perished were pretty much buried exactly where they fell, and sometimes in other ways, but basically none of them were proper burials. So this group is dedicated to making sure that these soldiers, no matter what country they come from, not just Latvian soldiers, but no matter what country they come from, that they are recovered and given a proper burial, and reunited with their families, if at all possible. So first of all, Victoria, Legenda has been in existence for 20 years. And I really would like to hear, because first of all, Victoria is the daughter of one of the founders. So no better person to ask than her. What was the impetus in the beginning of Legenda? What got this started?
Well, the story has been told to me by my father multiple times. I've been asking him about it recently as well, because we're making the film and I need to know the details. So the thing that he told me was, it all started in 1999, summer, and I was 1. And you can imagine a toddler at 1 year old needs a lot of attention. And so my father was watching the news with me and my mom, and he saw how one of the leaders of Legenda, Talis, was digging up a tank, recovering somewhere in Latvia. So he looked at my mom and he said, "Can I please go? Because it's really, really exciting. And I really, really, really want to take part in that." And I love my mom. She said, "Yes, please go do this. This is your passion." So he went there immediately. It was like a 30-minute drive, and he met Talis. And together, knowing that this is something that they need to do because it hasn't been done before, they started Legenda, after also meeting one of the other founders, Duxi, who one day called, I don't remember who he called, but it wasn't Legenda because it did not exist as an organization before. But he called somewhere, maybe the War Cemetery Committee, that he thought in the back of his backyard at a farmhouse, there are 4 soldiers buried. And so the War Cemetery Committee called my father and Talis, and they came and they checked. There were no soldiers, but they made a very important contact. And together, the 3 of them, the same year, created Legenda, because so many calls like these are received. Most of them are legends because, you don't know if, or don't remember, or it has been told through generations that there are soldiers buried in your backyard. So who do you call? You call Legenda. And like Ghostbusters, we come and we check.
Say that. I think this is definitely, at least for me, it's kind of a foreign thought that, somebody would think they have burials in their backyard. I mean, obviously we have that here with, prehistoric burials and sometimes historic burials. But for the most part, this is a lot more prevalent in Latvia. And I think it's important. There's kind of a race against time. I'd like you to maybe get into a little bit why this is so important, because of the fact that there are others with nefarious reasons that are actually also doing the same thing, but not doing it for the right reason. So would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah, I guess the people that you're talking about that are not doing it for the right reasons are called black diggers here, who just search for items and not soldiers. But naturally, the reason is because so many of these remains lay on private land, and people randomly stumble upon them, either by doing construction or, oh, I needed to dig a potato field and I dug a bit too far and oh my God, there are bones. And then there's also the race of time in terms of nature. Nature can be very rough, especially if the earth is acidic. We find a lot of remains that are just, those are bones, but they literally fall apart once you pick them up. So 10 years more, I'm pretty sure you won't have anything left there.
So for those that aren't familiar with the group, they have a fabulous Facebook site. They also have a website too, but on the Facebook site, they post videos, and sometimes just like almost the entire excavation, they will post its hours where you can just watch them do their thing. And many times you're hitting the water table. Many times you're in a very swampy land. It's messy work, but I can imagine that, that's a very good point, that, these burials will not be there for very much longer. So how many people do you have in Legenda, and typically how do they become involved?
Unfortunately, we do not keep track of those who are involved in Legenda right now, but we're planning to do that. I think in terms of people who are native to Latvia, there's around 100 people. And from outside Latvia, I think there's 31. To get involved in Legenda, before it was just, oh, I know this one friend of mine. I think he could be very helpful. He likes to work. Can we get him on a dig and see if, he fits the group or something? And, we're all volunteers. We just try to do our best. And we know we have a lot of people who also want to volunteer, but they're just, you cannot manage so many people on a small land. Like usually we recover like 1-2 soldiers a day. Sometimes it's a mass grave and there's 10, 20. And you cannot have all 150 people on the same digging site.
Yeah, I can imagine also, just because, you mentioned the black diggers. So basically the black diggers are people that, there's a market for the military goods that end up in the graves. Specifically, I know that you've mentioned before, I've seen it, during your filming of the excavations, that the Russian soldiers, unlike at least American soldiers or other countries, they would actually go into combat with all of their medals. And so if they perish in that combat, then you have all these medals, and these bring, quite a bit of money along with other pieces from uniforms. And because of that, these black diggers are going in there and they're basically desecrating these makeshift graves just so that they can get the goods, and they're not respectful of the remains, and they just take what they need and they go. And so I know you guys are, it's very evident from the filming of all these excavations that you're very respectful of everything. So everything that comes out of the ground that belongs to that soldier, that at least you can figure out belongs to that soldier, goes into your casket. It's like a cardboard casket. Can you tell me a little bit about that process?
Well, first of all, the black diggers, they're not just desecrating the graves. The metals can actually help us identify the soldier that's buried there. So it's 10 times worse knowing that you could have helped someone get back to their family. And that information is lost a lot of the times. The process of why and how we put them in the cardboard boxes, right?
Yeah, I mean, like maybe even the process, because those that generally listen to this podcast are archaeologists. So, just kind of the process of, what it is that goes in with the remains, and kind of a high view of how you guys do that.
Well, usually we just put the remains themselves in the cardboard box. Sometimes it's personal items or some sort of identification, because we usually just put it in an archive with the War Cemetery Committee, the number of the identification and things like that. But I think the piece itself goes in with the soldier because it's their item. Mm-hmm. And we really value the fact that, we can put the soldier back to the ground in this cardboard box with all of the items that he was carrying, and, lay him to his final peace where people can come and visit them.
So the boxes, just to kind of give a visual to our listeners, the boxes, they look almost like ossuary boxes or bone boxes, but they're small. They're about, I would say, maybe 2.5 feet long or 3 feet long, about a foot wide, and about maybe 1.5 feet deep. They have that kind of beveled edge. They're specifically meant for this purpose. It's not just a cardboard box, but they're made out of something that will easily dissipate into the ground rather than, it's not wood or anything like that. And it's also, there are so many remains that you're dealing with that, the cost has got to be prohibitive to put them into, some elaborate box, much less, all the other aspects and the costs that go along with doing an excavation like this. So,
yeah.
But it's pretty impressive. At the end, you guys have a ceremony that you typically, you lay them out, and I know, we can go into it, but I'm really curious. I know our listeners would be interested to find out how it is that you do identify, you make these connections with and find out who exactly these people are prior to burying them. So, because I know that if you're able to identify the type, the soldier and the soldier's origin, country of origin, then you give that country the opportunity to bring those remains back to their country, correct?
If it's possible, yes.
Yeah.
But a lot of the times it's the reality that you cannot bring remains over the border.
Right.
So
that was actually my question. I was wondering, with this being World War I and World War II soldiers, I imagine they're not all, from Latvia. They would be from other places. So I was just curious about repatriation, for lack of a better word, of how this works. Do people come and get the remains of, family members or descendants, or if those can't be located, is it governments, or are they just kept in Latvia and buried there?
I would really love to go deeper into the process, but the reality right now is that we find soldiers, whether they're German, Russian, whatever, they're buried at the war cemeteries that are meant for them. So let's say First World War German cemetery, boom. Second World War Russian something cemetery, boom. And that's how it works right now, because you can't always identify a soldier. So you have a lot of unknown soldiers laying in the ground, and they need a resting place. And sending soldiers over the border isn't always the possibility. So we have dedicated war cemeteries for them.
Is that the cemetery organization that you've talked about previously? Are they the ones that set up those different places for, final resting places, the cemeteries?
So it's the War Cemetery Committee. They have been responsible for that since the 20s after the First World War, and they're the ones who order those cardboard boxes for us to bury the soldiers in and provide support and information. And, they're just great.
We'll be putting the link to the Legenda Military Archaeology in the show notes, and I highly recommend you take a look. They have some beautiful pictures of the ceremonies. They're done so well. It's so respectfully and beautifully done, these ceremonies, that I know that Legenda basically made. They're the reason that these happen, and it's pretty impressive, and it's really, really nicely done. They put them, place them in the ground. There's flowers. They bring dignitaries in. They have religious dignitaries come in and say their blessings. It's just beautifully done. It's hard to explain with words, but there's videos and there's pictures that can communicate that. So
yeah, it's really beautiful. We love when we get the opportunity to experience the joy of finding someone who was lost and the joy of bringing everybody peace. And we only get to do it with them.
With the cemetery committee?
Yeah, with the cemetery committee, with the priests coming along, all the beautiful stuff.
Right. Great. Well, I think this is a perfect opportunity to take a break. And on the other side, we'll start talking about the more personal relationship of Legenda with Latvia, and then the relationship involvement that Victoria has with Legenda.
Chris Webster here for the Archaeology Podcast Network. We strive for high-quality interviews and content so you can find information on any topic in archaeology from around the world. One way we do that is by recording interviews with our hosts and guests located in many parts of the world all at once. We do that through the use of Zencastr. That's Zencastr. Zencastr allows us to record high-quality audio with no stress on the guest. Just send them a link to click on, and that's it. Zencastr does the rest. They even do automatic transcriptions. Check out the link in the show notes for 30% off your first 3 months, or go to zencastr.com and use the code CRMARC. Looking to expand your knowledge of X-rays and imaging in the archaeology field? Then check out An Introduction to Paleoradiography, a short online course offering professional training for archaeologists and affiliated disciplines. Created by archaeologist, radiographer, and lecturer James Elliott, the content of this course is based upon his research and teaching experience in higher education. It is approved by the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists as 4 hours of training. That's in the UK, for those of you that don't know. So don't miss out on this exciting opportunity for professional and personal development. For more information on pricing and course structure, visit paleoimaging.com. That's PALEO imaging.com, and look for the link in the show notes to this episode. Welcome back to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 221, and we are taking a slight detour from essentially U.S.-based CRM archaeology like we mostly talk about and kind of branching out a little bit, which is great because it broadens everybody's horizons and we get to talk about different things. So I want to know, Victoria, how the Latvian people basically see Legenda, right? Like, how is this well received there? Does everybody know about it, for example? I mean, I know Latvia is not an enormous country, so I would imagine, given the impact of World War I and World War II on a country of this size, that, having burials and soldier burials and things like that is probably, unfortunately, common. And just how do the Latvian people view this organization, and do they generally support it?
Well, I guess support is very basic, very normal. Like, some people know we exist, but we're not widely known. We have news reporters making, news about us and writing articles. But regarding archaeology itself, a lot of professionals in Latvia do not agree with what we do. And after talking to Heather and getting the Cultural Resource Management title very well known to me now, I think I could have argued better if I knew it before, but now we do not get involved at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I've talked to kind of Victoria at length about, some of the, archaeology has its culture in and of itself. And, we talk about that a lot on this podcast. And, a lot of times people make these harsh or rash decisions. I think that I've made some connection with and told Victoria that actually what I think they do is very much like CRM archaeology. So CRM archaeology, a lot of times people consider it, they call it salvage archaeology. And so it's very different than the academic side of archaeology, because in most times, with an academic archaeology, they know of a site, they're studying a site, a known site. There's a specific reason they're studying that site. Where CRM archaeology, these sites are brought to them because through some sort of development, construction, agricultural work, any kind of ground disturbance, a discovery, what we call an inadvertent discovery, is made, and it needs to be treated. There needs to be something done in order to preserve it. Either we preserve the site entirely, or we, through the collection of artifacts and data, that we try to preserve at least the information that we can glean from the site. And so I think I actually see this as being very similar. So, you have sometimes they call perfection can be the enemy of good, right? So if you're going to say, okay, and I know through talking to Victoria that sometimes some of the academic archaeologists have said, no, you have to do everything proper, and you have to, make sure that you get all the information, all the data before, you go on to your next 10 centimeter level. And, and, that's great if you have the time. But when you're working and you have a race against time, where development is going to move forward. And remember, this is Latvia, so I just assume that they don't have the same kind of, environmental regulations and laws in place to preserve sites. And then also you have this other element of the black diggers that are going in, and they're just ruining, just like Victoria said, any kind of provenance with the soldiers and the ability to be able to bring these soldiers and at least put them to rest, which is, in my opinion, yes, I think it's great that if we could, dissect some of these, war sites, these battlefield sites, that would be tremendous. But the most important thing is the human element, and that these soldiers be put to rest. That's the most important thing. And so if you have a choice between the two, I think that is what has to take a precedence. And so to me, I see a lot of what Legenda does as CRM archaeology. And I told Victoria that there is this chasm unfortunately, between academia and CRM archaeology. Academia many times does not give CRM that due in that respect. And so I just think what the group does is tremendous. And if it wasn't for them, there would be so many more soldiers that were not able to be put to rest. And I'd love to hear Bill's opinion from speaking of academia. Bill.
Yeah, I mean, so I have a couple of questions, but my first one is, where is really the focus in Latvian archaeology right now? I mean, there's just so much. Since I found out this was what we were going to focus on, I spent some time, looking up the whole area, and I was just thinking about probably 1,000 amazing archaeological time periods and sites and, places. There's just so many questions I have about the whole area. But I guess my first question would be, where is most of the academic or the formally trained archaeologists, where are they mostly focusing in Latvia?
Well, they usually focused on medieval, early medieval, settlements, burials, stuff like that. When I worked for a professional archaeologist, we were digging up a river that used to go through the old town, but was, I think, closed up in the 18th or 19th century. So we found stuff in there going back to the settlement of Riga, 12th century, something like that. And yeah, that's what I experienced in Latvian professional archaeology. Yeah, I guess they just do medieval ages. None of them I've never seen any of them do anything related to World War II or World War I, which, they're very welcome to come and join or do it themselves, but they never do. And I don't know why.
Yeah, exactly. I think just to give you some background, Bill, I don't know if you stumbled across this during your research, but some of the detractors with Legenda in the past have been non-Latvian archaeologists, and not even people that study in Latvia, but just conflict archaeologists that are primarily based in Britain, I think.
Yeah, because that kind of leads me into the next question, because the idea would be that, folks from Latvia who are part of their own country would be trying to handle their own heritage and everything. And part of it is these two amazing apocalyptic wars that just traipsed across the country, World War I and World War II. Folks from Latvia, they participated, but they weren't the main belligerents. And so they're left with kind of the remains of these massive wars. And I don't really know who the detractors are. That's why I asked if it was folks that are in the country that are archaeologists that don't think that this is real archaeology. And, from what you said, Heather, that most of the people are saying something that come from outside of that country. They're not really folks who have this kind of situation going on. Like if they're coming from the United States and they're saying something about it, we haven't had a massive, hundreds of millions person war that went across our country that wasn't our own actual, citizens and everything. So it's a completely different situation. So then that brings into the conversation questions about, who is really in charge of saying, what goes, like who's the one who gets to say how those individuals are excavated and what methods are used. And if it's something that's going on that's, accepted in Latvia, and that's just the way that they do this kind of salvage archaeology, then, it's kind of for us to stand back and watch and maybe ask questions, but, be the bystanders, right? To actually just watch things happen, because this argument comes up a lot when academic archaeologists find out that we're using backhoes and other heavy machinery on archaeological sites, or that we're excavating off this other layer that's more recent from the early 20th century so that we can get down to the prehistoric layer. These kind of conversations go on all the time in academic archaeology, where they think that maybe we should be using toothbrushes the whole way down 10 meters until we finally get to the site that we're looking at. So it's not really the same. If we're talking about methods, then wouldn't we want to watch what they're doing there and maybe contribute if we can positively, and if not, then contribute monetarily? Because that's my next question.
Right.
Are there organizations that are actually assisting Latvia financially and technically? Like, we have a thing in the United States called JPAC, which is Joint POWMIA Accounting Command, which is something from the United States Department of Defense. It's an organization that has bioanthropologists and archaeologists and historians and folks who are looking for missing U.S. soldiers, specifically from the Vietnam War. But I think that they probably work on any space where there's American soldiers that are lost associated with World War II and other wars. But they have a concerted effort, and they have funding behind it to work with governments in places like, India, or formerly Burma, or Vietnam, or Guam, or these other locations where U.S. soldiers have fallen, to try and find where human remains are at for U.S. soldiers. So do you have something like that? Is there something coming from Russia or Germany? I know those are the two main countries, but do you have something like that that's helping you out with professional archaeologists, funding, quality tools, technical expertise, and then kind of an organized research domain? Do you have something like that?
So before I answer that question, I need to tell you that everything that we do is completely legal. We have all the permissions to work the way that we do, and we follow specific standards that have been set by the War Cemetery Committee. And regarding sponsorship or anything, we get our finances literally from donations. We are not supported by the government. We have some support from the War Cemetery Committee. I think some support from Volksbund. And everything else is just, people who like what we do donating. Then, companies like MineLab that produce these huge, they're not metal detectors, but there's something like it. Basically, they can look deep into the ground to help us understand if it's worth digging 2 meters down or not, if there are remains or anything else, any disturbance in the ground. So yeah, everything that we get from people basically privately, and it helps to pay for fuel or pay to help contribute burying soldiers, which is something that we do also contribute to. ourselves. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a major grassroots effort. The more that I've been talking to you, Victoria, and to some of the other members, it's just, to me, it's really impressive what you guys have been able to do, with the limited funds that you have. Yeah, it's there are people that deeply believe that what you're doing is important. And those are the ones that are primarily providing the financial support, along with, I know there's some, like you said, Mind Lab and some tech companies that have at least donated at least technology, but a lot of it, not only, which just as I've become more and more a part of your group, the research, there's as much time donated as there is money. The amount of time that the Legenda members put into this, into the research efforts is really astounding.
So is it just Latvia? I mean, I'm just trying to figure this out because we've got this massive war, and I'm wondering, is the United States for World War II doing this for, our fallen in Italy or France or something like that? And I'm also wondering, how come Germany and Russia are not part of this whole, it's just kind of strange for me, once again, coming from the United States, where our wars don't have anywhere close to as many casualties as World War I or World War II in these countries, right? Is it just a matter of just capacity? Germany and Russia just don't have the funds to try and look for these tens of millions of fallen over 60 years. It just seems kind of strange to me that they wouldn't even at least give you the maps and, the locations of where individuals were at day by unit, because it seems like their archives would have that kind of stuff unless somehow the archives were destroyed. It just seems odd that you would be going out there with kind of no idea of where stuff's at, in addition to not even having any funding. I mean, just having to go to the archives and figure it out on your own. It's kind of crazy that at least, the German Republic today isn't just giving you, okay, well, here's all of the logs. I mean, we're talking something that's 70 plus years ago. Here's all the logs of where all these units are at, digitized. And here's, where they should have been at this time. And we know that we lost X amount of individuals, or the same thing coming from Russia. It just seems odd that you wouldn't even get that, because I know that when JPAC, and the only, like I said, I'm not a bioanthropologist. I just have colleagues who have worked for JPAC. They spend a lot of time researching where a single plane with 6 individuals went down, in the jungle or something like that. And they'll look through all of that stuff, and that stuff is made available to these university archaeologists and other folks who are affiliated, so that they can more target their efforts to try and find these individuals. It just seems strange that you're kind of unsupported like that. And my next question is, how come? And I'm not German and I'm not Russian, so I can't say anything about those things. I can't talk about how those governments operate, but it seems kind of odd. And then it makes me wonder if that's how other European governments operate for all these wars going back. Do they just kind of move on, and whoever was buried by the soldiers at the time, those are the ones that are in the veteran cemetery? But these hundreds of thousands of people who are just missing, do they just kind of wash their hands of it until a farmer finds them? I mean, it's just an odd thing for me to think about.
Yeah, it's really uncomfortable, the whole situation. The Russian and the German governments, they do help to bury the soldiers, but not always, which is really, really sad, because it's their people. We do also do our own research, unless someone, calls us and tells us, 70 years ago, my grandma saw 10 soldiers being buried here, and then she heard shots coming from that direction. But my grandma is not alive anymore, so go ahead and look.
So I think this is a good opportunity for us to take a break. And on the other side, segment 3, we're going to talk a little bit about some efforts and some creative efforts that Victoria's put together in order to find ways for other kind of fundraising and for acknowledgement and more understanding in the public of what they do, so that they can find some more support.
You may have heard my pitch for membership. It's a great idea and really helps out. However, you can also support us by picking up a fun t-shirt, sticker, or something from a large selection of items from our TeePublic store. Head over to ArchPodNet.com/shop for a link. That's ArchPodNet.com/shop to pick up some fun swag and support the show.
We're back with Victoria from Legenda Military Archaeology. And, in the last segment, we were talking a lot about just, the support and the burden of being able to do this. I mean, you can have that passion, you can have the desire to do the right thing and bring these soldiers back to a place of peace, give them a respectful burial. But, it's difficult. The communicating to the public what you're doing, getting that support, both, the moral support, but also the financial support, because obviously this takes a lot of money. For those of us that are CRM archaeologists, we know this, doing this sort of thing is not cheap. It takes a lot of financial and a lot of time, which, it's the more that I learn about Legenda, the more impressed I am with the amount of time that people have donated to these efforts. So in this segment, I'd like to talk about the documentary, Victoria, that you have started work on. And this is just to give some context. There was a documentary that was made several years ago about Legenda and the journey of discovery and the purpose of the group. And I was fortunate enough, Victoria sent it to me. I was able to watch it. It was fascinating. Actually, I really enjoyed it. I really felt and related to the Legenda members that were highlighted in the group. And there's so many, it was complex. It was dealt with not just from what they're doing, but how it impacted each individual person that was involved in this passion project. And one of the wonderful and absolutely, definitely the cutest star of the documentary, Keep Smiling, was Victoria. I don't know how old you were. You look like maybe you were 7 or 8.
5.
5. Wow, you were an old 5. You're an old soul anyway. So
Yeah.
So maybe Victoria, if you could just tell us a little bit about this original Keep Smiling documentary, and then we'll talk about your documentary and the connection between the two.
Yeah, well, I've never actually asked the creators why the documentary happened, so I don't know the details how it even came along. I knew there was a script, and then there was a camera and a camera operator, and they just went in and did the film, and I was in there, and I was confused most of the time, but when the film came out on the big screen is when Victoria figured out Victoria wants to be in the movie business. I mean, you get to tell incredible stories in a very captivating visual way, and oh my God.
It hooked you right away, just like archaeology has hooked the rest of us, right?
Yeah, but I was born into archaeology, so
right.
Being shown in a film and being shown how a film can tell a story in a very captivating way,
yes,
just did something to me. I remember I then talked to the director. I was also 5 when it came out, and I was like, I want to do film. Can you please tell me what I need to do? So that was fun.
The documentary it was mainly focused on kind of this passion project, the connection between those that were involved, and kind of you really got to see a day-to-day life. You got to see the human connection. You got to see, how it impacted the family and how the family, everybody was involved in this passion project, and how, it kind of went from almost how they kind of stumbled, not in a bad way, but how they just kind of stumbled along to, now you see them in museums. They're letting the Latvian people understand, what happened through the medium of museums, while at the same time they're recovering these burials and giving proper burials to these soldiers. I think my understanding with the new documentary is that you're still going to have that element, but that there's a story, there's an underlying story that you're potentially going to be telling of the journey of somebody trying to find a loved one. Is that correct?
Definitely, because you have to tell these stories. When Keep Smiling was made, it was just 4 years into Legenda's existence, and we are now past 22 years. We've grown a lot. We've evolved. There's many more of us now. And I think right now is the best time to tell the story of new Legenda. And I'm excited. I don't even know where to begin, because there's so much that we are planning to tell, not just the process of finding soldiers or, families that have been involved, hurt by the experience, but just personal experiences. Why are we doing this? What is the meaning behind it? Why do we need to tell the story? Stuff like that.
So as archaeologists, there are times where obviously, it's a passion for most of us. I would say probably a large majority of us. But there are moments in time where you feel this instant connection, this human connection through discovery. And then that human connection and your own personal experience assists you in your interpretation of what it is that you do discover. It's also a large part of the romance of archaeology. So from what I know about the documentary, it appears that it focuses on the experience of a certain person and this desire to find their loved one. And maybe that's just my perception. I know that you did a small film that you did with your iPhone, which was extraordinary. In fact, if at all possible, I'd love to put it in the show notes because it was beautifully done. And it talks about, kind of gives you a little snippet. I think it's pretty short, but it was beautifully done. It was Victoria's work. And, you do highlight a woman who is your host. And I'm not sure if she had a loved one that was lost or if she was the person who owned the property. But I think it was so well done in being able to communicate the connection that the Latvian people individually have. And just like Bill was saying, is that, some of the scars that are on just the Latvian conscience of having to endure, a world war like this or multiple world wars like this is, being able to delve into that. And I mean, it would probably take 100 documentaries to really cover it fully. So do you have an idea of what specifically you're going to focus on in this?
I really want to tell the personal stories of the people who are involved, because we get very interesting people sharing their stories, asking to find their relatives. And a lot of the times, we get a few messages a week, people asking to find their relatives. And a lot of the times, the search for any information can be very, very tricky. It could take months. And we just had an experience recently where we did just that. We were looking for multiple months until we finally found the place. And just now, I think next week, we are going to go and see if the place is actually correct. And there's a 70% chance that it is, and then the 30% that, oh my God, we failed, and we have to scrap it and start the research again. So stories like that is something that I also want to put in the film, along with just, personal experiences. As I said, why are we doing this? That is the main question that I want to answer in the film, as well as just bring attention to Legenda and spark interest in Latvian history and the importance of finding all these soldiers and burying them. Just everything.
Sounds like an amazing project. I mean, I know that what you all are doing is extraordinary, and I mean, there's no real parallels that I can imagine. So, I can't wait to see how the whole thing unfolds. I've been watching from afar a lot of the things going on, the controversies between, what you folks are doing and what some of the other just relic hunters are doing. It's kind of disgusting what some people are doing over there. But, like moving forward, I think that, one of the main things that could grow from all this, aside from raising awareness, is possibly trying to set up some kind of training program or some kind of formal way to recover human remains as exists in a lot of other places. And so do you have any plans to, work with professional archaeologists or work with some of these recovery groups to try and figure out, a way that you can kind of join the larger movement that have happened in a lot of other places like the places I'm most familiar with are Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Rwanda to try and find human remains. Are you interested in joining that whole group and getting training as whatever their systems are, so that you can kind of join this larger movement? Because what's sad is there's the potential that maybe someday this could possibly happen again, and that we would need skilled and dedicated folks like you all to help us in the future. So is there any kind of motion towards that? Does the film show you having some kind of formal systems or something that would basically have the detractors realize, you're moving forward and that you are organized, and that, contrary to what they think, you're a legitimate organization, Not that I'm not trying to say you're not a legitimate organization, but I know as someone who's an archaeology professor, and as Heather mentioned, that how they feel about what cultural resources do, you know what I'm saying? Like, they definitely think there's a division, and I can imagine there's a division there in Europe. So does the film have the potential to do that too?
Yeah, I definitely want to go into details of how we do things, the process from A to Z. And Legenda each year is growing, learning new things and expanding. And one of the thoughts that one of the founders has said is that we would like to collaborate with a university that would come and do studies here and in return teach us as well, because why not? Why not? But as long as we get to do things fast, we're fine.
I think the key is, I actually think that, Victoria and I have talked about this, that they really, academia, anybody that helps has got to understand the idea of triage here. And that being that, the importance is that before these sites get destroyed, that the most important thing is that the remains are recovered. Now, understanding that, I think a lot of times Victoria and Legenda is working on areas that will be destroyed if this work is not done. And so, understanding that concept that we can't take out the toothbrushes, as Bill said, and that I do think that actually it should, having groups inform, the group that you're talking about, Bill, I think would definitely have a much better grasp on how to inform Legenda and, to work with them. I think, to be honest with you, just the time that I've spent with them and what I do know, which is minimal at this point, but I'm still very impressed with the amount of research that goes into everything they do, and that the fact that their desire is to do the right thing. They are very careful just because of that passion in and of itself. But, obviously, all archaeologists, we can do things better. We can, learn better methods. And I definitely think that might help. But it would have to be the right person, because I do know that in the past, there have been individuals that have come in and have said, not just to Legenda, but to other groups that do this. There are other groups. There's a group in Belgium. There are other groups that do this that are volunteer groups. And they've come in and said, no, you can't do it that way. And then they want to slow the process down, which, again, might help getting 10 burials out of the ground while thousands of burials are destroyed. And so there has to be some kind of middle ground where people understand that, yes, methods are important. Getting as much data as we can is important. But again, perfection can't be the enemy of good here. And we can't put aside the actual purpose of getting the burials out of the ground and only focus on the data and the information potential. I think it can be both, but it's got to be the right person to assist in that journey.
I completely agree with you. Definitely.
Yeah, this has been great and it's amazing. And I don't know if you know, Victoria, but secretly, I already use this as one of the ethical questions in my classes here at Berkeley. I have for the last couple of years. And, here in the United States, students are familiar with, the ethics of working with African-American slave remains or Native American human remains. But then when I talk about something like this, where there's tens of thousands of people buried in unmarked graves or buried in trenches or, the result of freezing or starvation, when they look at the magnitude of what's going on, a lot of times the students are just kind of like, they can't figure out, what's the right path. So, I think that helping families and doing what you're doing is definitely one of the right paths, right? You're helping individuals, and it's your country that has to deal with all this stuff, and you're not necessarily getting a lot of support. So I can't wait to see what's going on in your future. And so maybe you can give us a little information about what's next, what's coming up in the near future.
Wow, that's a really good question. As far as I can see at the moment regarding Legenda, we are trying to do everything to reach a specific level where everyone is happy, starting from Legenda and then the surroundings. And it's a very hard thing to balance, to be efficient and fast and also do things correctly, because what is the correct way? Except for finding the remains, exhuming them the right way, which is for us, we do use brushes actually. A lot of the times if it's sand, because if it's clay, you can't do that. So as much as we can, we try to do it the archaeological way, keeping in mind that we need to do things fast. And yeah, that's that.
Just, for some context, what I do for a living, obviously I do CRM, but one of my research focuses is human osteology. I am my company's corporate human osteologist. So when through the process of our projects come across human burials, I'm the one who does respond and treat and put together a methodology. And I will say that, I've been watching Legenda, and again, I've said it this multiple times, I wouldn't be as supportive of this group if I didn't see the value in their methods. And, of course, like I said, every archaeologist can improve methodology. And, I hope that, with my involvement, I can assist in that way from a very humble perspective, because to say that, what they've done already is pretty impressive. In fact, I would put quite a few of their members against many people in the CRM world that I've worked with. So, I give a lot of props to the Legenda members and how they've improved their methods over the years. I just want to, finish the podcast by introducing the fact that we are going to team up with Victoria and Aaron, her filmmaker, and we have now created a new podcast that's going to chronicle the filming process in real time of this documentary called Still Smiling. I guarantee you that this is, I can't, just like Victoria said, it's a creative process. And so to be able to put it down, 1, 2, 3, this is exactly what's going to happen, which I think, that's not possible because, like I said, it's a creative process, but I think it's going to make it even more tantalizing, more interesting. And that is, we're going to be providing a sneak peek into the final film product. We're going to allow the listeners an intimate understanding of both the Legenda group and the story of discovery from the perspective of a family member and perspective of the Legenda members themselves. And so we hope that as many are interested in this type of work or just a little curious, that you'll take that journey with us. And we're going to be doing that for the next 6 to 8 months. And Victoria, I'm so excited that you're willing to do this, and I think it's going to be a wonderful journey. So
thank you.
Okay, well, with that, we will say goodbye to this podcast, and there's links in the show notes for a lot of the things that we did talk about, so go check that out. And when the podcast starts releasing, we will of course let you guys know that as well. And again, thank you, Victoria, for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archpodnet.com/CRMArchPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at archpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye.
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 Goodbye. Stay tuned for a Still Smiling podcast.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV Traveling America, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to archpodnet.com/members for more info.